Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of How Stories Work. Today, I'm going to talk about the narrative family of elements present in subtext and what that means for the structure of your story. When you come into the premise builder in subtext, the very first thing that it asks you is what kind of a story do you want to write? And it's set to this default action adventure Raiders of the Lost Ark thing. You can change it to an adventure fantasy, or you can change it to something like a coming of age drama. There are all kinds of different genres, and what they do is they move around the four different through lines to give your story a different kind of personality. If you think of your story as an actual person, which it is, then the mind of that person, what their personality is like, that's what this arrangement of four through lines is all about. The next step down are the narrative family of elements, which are these four here: aspirational, profound, capable, and contemplative. It may be that when you're watching this video and you load up subtext that these names might be different. And that's because I'm always constantly evolving subtext, always trying to find the best way to get across a concept. Point of fact, these names don't really mean anything. I could just call them 1, 2, 3, and 4, or A, B, C, D, but I'd like to add just a little bit of knowledge to it so that the writers that use subtext and use it to structure their stories start to get a feel for what these different personalities are like. If the top level is just the arrangement of the four through lines and the kind of personality that creates, then the next step down really focuses it in on a certain particular point of conflict. What you'll notice is if I go back to the default and I look at aspirational, we have future, obtaining, becoming, and subconscious. And these are four different ways of looking at the same kind of area of conflict that our minds can take in and appreciate. When we're focused on the future from a fixed external point of view, we're also focused on obtaining or achieving something in an external process point of view. The difference between this one on the right and the left is this one is fixed, the future is fixed, and then obtaining is actually process, but they work together. And then to balance out future and obtaining, we have becoming and subconscious. Becoming is the balance to obtaining. So the same way you achieve externally through physical conflict, you can also achieve internally by becoming. You can see how they are related to each other. And then the relation between future is subconscious. So if externally one is focused on the future, then internally one is focused on the subconscious, which in the dramatica theory of story represents ego or drive or aspirations. When you go to structure your story, you want to make sure that the concerns in each through line are all set in the same general area, that they're all set within the same narrative family. When you start to break them apart, and perhaps you have future and obtaining in the main character and relationship story through line, but then you come in here and you put conceptualizing and memory in the objective story and influence character through lines, it's not going to work. Your story will be broken. The way you create a cohesive story structure is you maintain these narrative families across all four through lines. If I bring the objective story back up here and we look at the main character, domain and universe, and the objective story, domain and physics, and then we look at the profound family, we see past, understanding, conceptualizing, and memory. Taken together, these four are the kind of thematic concerns that a director like Christopher Nolan likes to explore. Pretty much everything from Memento to The Prestige to Inception to Batman Begins, pretty much every single film that he's done focuses in on this set of thematic concerns, looking to see where conflict comes from the past, how it's influenced by conflict from memories, what that means objectively in terms of understanding, and then in regards to relationships, what are the kind of psychological implications of conceptualizing? Like, how do things fit together? This creates a heavy, sort of profound meaning to the thematic argument going on in the story. Contrast this with the default aspirational family of future, obtaining, becoming, subconscious, and you see something closer to Raiders of the Lost Ark or pretty much any American film from the mid 20th century. Directly across from aspirational, we have capable. These are stories where the thematic concerns have to do with people's capabilities and their ability to resolve conflict. Whereas the aspirational is about achieving and conquering or dominating through conflict, capabilities are about people's skills and their ability to handle that conflict and how they're actually doing things. Obtaining is the difficulty in achieving or dominating something, whereas doing is actually the doing of it. If you think of a race, if it's a competitive sports film where there's a race in it, then the aspirational story will be about obtaining or winning that race. The story that's focused on the doing will be something that's much more about running in the race, how well they actually run the race, as opposed to whether or not they win. And those are two valid concerns and two valid focal points for different kinds of storytelling. The capable family groups doing, progress, preconscious, and being together. And you can see those are thematic concerns that flow with one another. Progress is how things are changing. Doing, again, is how well you're doing something. Being contrasts doing in terms of an internal psychology, how I am being. And that usually comes through by playing a role or pretending to be something. In the same way that doing contrasts with obtaining, being has the same relationship to becoming. Becoming is when you actually transform yourself into something completely different, and being is something that is more transitory or in the moment. And then finally, preconscious, which is the dramatic term for the fight or flight area of the mind. That is what contrasts progress. You can see how the fight or flight fits into the capabilities, because someone who is more drawn towards impulsively responding to something might not have the same capabilities as someone else. Finally, the last one are the contemplative family: present, learning, conceiving, and conscious. And these are conflicts that are more in the here and now. Present is what's going on this very moment. Learning is gathering information. Conceiving is getting an idea of something or inventing something. And then conscious is what you think or what it is that you're considering at that moment. An interesting thing that I've discovered as I go through and do this work with subtext and the dramatic theory of story is it seems as if these four narrative families switch culturally once every 10 to 20 years, depending on the generations. For instance, at the turn of the century, it was something that was more profound with The Matrix and The Sixth Sense and American Beauty. And then with the iPhone and the information age, we had more contemplative stories. And then now, within the last year or so, everything is switching to the aspirational, because that's going to be about control and achieving and what's going to happen in the future. And you can see how that reflects what's going on in the world. And then perhaps in 10 or 15 years from now, it'll switch to people's capabilities. And then that pattern repeats. I've noticed this in the last 80 to 100 years of American cinema, and I'm pretty sure that it will continue along this pattern. The last thing you'll notice is that regardless of where you position the individual through lines, these narrative families will stay in place. For instance, if I drag the objective story here into universe, you'll see that progress stayed in that place and doing is now a part of the main character through line. If I pull the objective story down here into the influence character concern of being, well, now the objective story is taking over being. These narrative families of elements are locked into position. If you bring in past, understanding, conceptualizing, and memory, if I pull the objective story up into here, now the objective story is a past. Maybe I want to do the objective story about memories. Then I pull it down into here, or perhaps I want to focus the objective story on understanding. And then the other through lines will shift to account for this move of plot into the physics domain. And in that way, you can ensure that the story structure you create has narrative cohesion, that it has integrity to it, and that it won't break down as you put all the different pieces together. So that's it for today's episode of How Stories Work. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I will see you tomorrow.